Sanbonan Dumelang, Goeiemorgen, or good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for the kind privilege to come to the Daily Maverick, certainly a premier event in the politics of South Africa. And I think it's my greatest privilege to be able to address you today. And I think it's quite ironic that we gather here today to discuss the events of the upcoming ANC's elective conference. And in fact, none of the ANC's candidates are here. I think, as the sponsors would say, I suspect they chickened out, but it's a whole. But ladies and gentlemen, I'm actually equally so not as surprised that Cyril Ramaphosa is not here. Because after all, his New Deal is in fact DA policy. And in fact, so it would be deeply unfair to give the DA two speakers at such a morning session. So I thought I should just put those out so that you understand what happens to liberation movements. Ladies and gentlemen, we find ourselves in a unique time in our country and certainly in the continent. Here we are, opposition leaders, civil society, business leaders, talking about the future of the ANC with no ANC in sight, apart from a couple of dissenting voices. And I think, is an accurate metaphor of what we stand for. If we truly want to draw the correct metaphor, I think it's best for us to not look far, but to look at what's happening up north in Zimbabwe. Because in truth, the story of Mugabe's ZANU-PF is precisely the same story of Zuma's ANC. It's an indicator of the fact that liberation movements often run their course. They fulfill their purpose by defeating unjust regimes, but then almost invariably end up on the wrong side of history. They become tempted by power and wealth, and often, without fail, become the very thing they fought against. Ladies and gentlemen, I think decades after freedom was won, they still define themselves as national liberation movements. And as Dr. Kulu in his great book, Unmasked, reminds us, for anyone to exist as a liberation movement, there always ought to be an enemy of some sort, and often that enemy is either racial oppression or colonization. I note the fact that the ANC is today still trying to create that enemy, for they failed the simple task of moving away from a national liberation movement to becoming, in fact, a political party. A party of ideas, a party that posits the future. And so their only task now is to create conditions that create enemies so that they can keep societies in perpetual struggle. So I'm here to argue the fact that ZANU-PF and the ANC, as the young people would say, same WhatsApp group. And what's playing out now in Zimbabwe in many ways is a blueprint for the ANC's inevitable demise. And just as opposition factions within the ZANU-PF are now pretending to offer a country a fresh start offer decades after Mugabe, we have a whole host of fresh start ANC candidates who are jostling for the positions within the ANC. Buoyed by a media who in fact has bought into the myth that liberation movements can and must save themselves, the ANC candidates have all miraculously reinvented themselves as corruption-busting friends of the poor. So at a quick glance, you'd think to yourself, no, man, these guys are clean when you hold them up against Jacob Zuma. But it's all a trick. It's an illusion. Because just like ZANU-PF's Emmerson Mnangagwa spent 3 decades doing Robert Mugabe's dirty work for him, all the candidates in the ANC's race have long been complicit in keeping our country trapped in this current state. They have supported policy, they have come to parliament to vote for Jacob Zuma, to defend Jacob Zuma. So in fact, one of these candidates was in fact even more complicit in the demise of Zimbabwe. During her tenure as foreign minister in the early 2000s, Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma, along with former President Thabo Mbeki, helped condemn Zimbabwe to another 15 years of misery under Robert Mugabe. The criminal policy of quiet diplomacy was nothing less than an outright support for Mugabe's decade-long reign of terror. Ladies and gentlemen, I really do hope that the recent events in Zimbabwe do teach us some profound lessons and give us a role to reflect deeply on our country. So, because this conference focuses itself on the future of the ANC, I want to make this point up front. It makes no material difference who is going to win in December at the conference. The ANC is dead. And come 2019, we must create an opportunity upon which we can rescue our country and steer our nation into a different direction. The change we seek will not be a change that will come from within the ANC. Because as my Kenyan friends remind me, that it just becomes another one's turn to eat. Our future in this country, in this continent, must be in a post-liberation era, and it lies in a post-ANC South Africa. I know for many of you this is hard to hear. It was hard for me. I understand what happened in the ANC and didn't vote for them in '94 because I couldn't. But when a party has dominated the political landscape for as long as they have, it is difficult to envisage a future without them. But I'm not here just talking about hardcore ANC loyalists. I'm talking about the fact that we must reform South Africa, including business communities, civil society, and the role that the media plays. Because currently our dominant narrative in our media is that it's still largely trapped in the paradigm of liberation movements. But sooner or later, we're going to have to stop this paradigm. We're going to have to do what's in the best interest of our country, even if it means making some tough decisions and turning your back on the party of your parents. Ladies and gentlemen, I campaigned hard last year. I traveled all across the country. I went to communities. South Africa still today has more than half of its citizens who are living below the poverty line. 9 million South Africans are poor. And as we're governing in more cities, we're discovering more and more the level of corruption that is there. This has got very little to do with Jacob Zuma. It's about the fact that actually the conversation we ought to be having today is what kind of South Africa are we going to build that is going to be inclusive for all South Africans. We have to, ladies and gentlemen, give this country a new beginning. We have to bring a change in this country that's not more than just simply replacing one racial elite for another, while the poor continue to exist in a parallel world. Change has to mean more than a handful of quick fixes in the run-up towards election. I'm here to talk to you rather about a new beginning. It's an offer I want to the people of South Africa, and particularly young South Africans. A future worth fighting for, a future in which they see opportunities and hope for themselves. If you want to turn the tide of this lost generation of South African youth, you have to look beyond populist ploys that are being deployed today, like a complete free higher education system. We have to take complete control of the development of our young people in what we seem to propose as from cradle to career. It is in fact a huge task. It's a function of not just cutting budgets to pay for free higher education, but it is profoundly the most important thing we can do for South Africa. I would argue that we have to ensure that before we talk about higher education, we ensure that every child can enter into an ECD center, that they can start school prepared for the education they're going to face up to. Currently, almost 3 million young children not only don't go to school, but they don't even receive nutritional needs. It must break our hearts when we discover that 4 children die every single day because of malnutrition, yet we're still committed to bailing out SAA. It must mean we must completely overhaul basic education and consider whether collaboration schools could not offer, particularly black South Africans, an opportunity in which they can find a decent education going forward. We must attract properly trained and talented teachers so that we can curb the unacceptable dropout rate and ensure that parents have the ultimate say in the education of their children. We must, ladies and gentlemen, embrace the coming world of technology. If we think young people are left behind today, as the fourth industrial revolution, which is already upon us in many ways, affects these young people, they'll be left further behind. So we have to give young people an education that empowers them for the technology that is coming. And ultimately, after school, we must give young people further options than just simply saying, let's go to higher education. And at first, I want to say this, that if you are poor in South Africa, money, race, your origin of birth should not be the limiting factor for you to go to higher education. We must ensure that poor South Africans can get access to higher education. So that speaks to having an expanded university funding model and a rollout of open online courses and better access to TVET colleges. And I think it's dramatically possible to increase education opportunities for young South Africans. But for those who choose not to study, we want to offer a variety of apprentices programs. I want to offer a national civilian service for a year where they can be on-the-job training for young people, give them a year where they can have the decency of work, and ensure that all throughout the country we can roll out national job centers that will present options for particularly young people. I think this is the scale of intervention that is required, because if we simply don't, we're going to smooth over the cracks and put stopgap measures year after year, and I run the risk of losing an entire generation and a country that may never recover from it. But this is just half the job. The second half is about creating an economy that can offer work opportunities for these young people. We must rebuild a growing, modern economy that can absorb these young people into the workforce. And ladies and gentlemen, we don't have time, we must do it soon. We must ensure that we talk about an expanding, inclusive economy. Can't just be wishful thinking, it requires genuine interventions. And I believe it can be done. And I believe our economy can be reignited to reach the growth figures that will deliver meaningful jobs. We can make South Africa an appealing destination for not only domestic investment, but for foreign direct investment. And we have to announce again to the world that South Africa is open for business. But to do so, I really believe there are few things. I always say we must look at South Africa in 3D. We must deconcentrate it, we must demonopolize, and we must deregulate our economy. If you're going to achieve this, there are certain commitments we have to make to an efficient, transparent, and pro-poor governance. Commitments that this ANC government has shown over and over again, and yet simply are not prepared to make. And so it has to fall on a new government to do so. I believe South Africa will have every chance of making a full recovery if a new government applies the following principles which I'd like to outline before you. Firstly, we need a capable state. We need a state that will attract quality people to come and work for government. If I did a poll in this room where I believe there are professionals and a variety of people, how many of you set yourself up for the ambition of working for government? I think you'd discover very few. And this is a challenge. We must have the best working for government, not those who are appointed because of party affiliation in a policy called cadre deployment. You see, if we don't achieve that, we're going to ensure that the Guptas or another connected family lay their hands on our wealth because they will have insiders in government on boards of SOEs who will open the door for them. The South Africa we need is for the best candidates in government, and university graduates must be lining up to come and work for the state. They will bring the necessary expertise to run departments and ensure that we can move away from patronage politics. Along with that, I think we need to take, secondly, serious steps around fiscal responsibility. I listened carefully to Minister Gigaba's midterm budget statement on how far tax collection missed its target. If we seriously want to close this gap, we're going to have to make some hard decisions on spending. We cannot simply tax ourselves to wealth. No country is able to do that. So this includes trimming, in fact, our bloated government. By OECD figures, South Africa has got the highest public sector wage bill in comparison to other countries. We have to reduce the number of ministries and deputy ministers that exist. It can't be that we secure deputy ministers more than we do our own borders. So ladies and gentlemen, we have to cut government, and I believe we can reduce the number of ministries for between 15 and 20 and ensure that we run a very capable government. It also includes the fact that we must deconcentrate our SOEs. These companies were designed for public benefit, not for a few, and are costing us an immense amount of money. So if we want to achieve this and stop SOEs from draining our fiscus, as we're seeing now in the Eskom inquiry, how the boards have been captured and how decisions were made by connected and protected individuals, we have to ensure that we demonopolize them and deconcentrate them. I've always held the view that why is it that a capable city like Cape Town, like Joburg, has the ability to run its own trains? This way we don't need PRASA. We can ensure that we can offer a competitive transport model for our citizens that benefits all South Africans. Thirdly, ladies and gentlemen, and this is a passion, we have to ensure that we engage in meaningful redress. Those South Africans who are left behind must know what the fruit of freedom means. It can't be just a replacing of one racial elite for another. So when we talk about triple BEE, we must mean a broad-based triple BEE. And that's why, for me, I want to champion how new entrants, new black businesses can be started. And to achieve that, I think we can find a way to contribute to what I call a jobs and a justice fund. This fund will be designed specifically to ensure that we give startup capital to new entrants and allow South Africans who are left out participation in the economy. And along with meaningful redress, of course, is the question of how we transfer land. And I always maintain that, in fact, economically speaking, we must ensure that South Africans who are left behind own title to that land. That's why in all the new municipalities that we've taken, we've distributed more title deeds than ever before, and we will continue to ensure that that is rolled out nationally, and ultimately, where there's farmland, we can introduce share equity schemes so that more people can participate. Fourthly and lastly, we must take a zero tolerance to corruption. Ladies and gentlemen, corruption is destroying our country. It's the cancer that is destroying our nation. I would posit that if we introduced a minimum sentence for those who are corrupt of at least 15 years, I include the president in that, and if I can quote Dr. Makosi Khoza, maybe some people must trade their overalls, they must trade their suits and beautiful dresses for orange overalls, so that the next meeting must be at sunset. But you've got to apply this principle consistently. And this requires for us to, in fact, appoint the right director of public prosecutions. And these powers must be removed from the president, and the head of the NPM must be appointed in the same way as you would appoint judges in this country. These are just but a few, but we can do immediately to turn our country around. And if you apply some of these principles, we can put some foundations to what would mean to a prosperous South Africa for all. But we don't have to wait till 2019 to see these benefits and these principles applied. For over a year now, our DA-led coalition governments, and thanks to coalition partners, we've been able to deposit, at least demonstrate to South Africans, a post-ANC future, as we show in the Western Cape, in the city of Cape Town. And it's important that we do so in partnership with other parties, for the future of South Africa is coalitions. It has to be that way so that we can construct a country where the diversity of views is heard, included, and we can lead South Africa. And our metro governments have already shown that it's possible to bring these parties together and overcome differences to achieve a common goal. If this common goal is achieved, it ought to improve the lives of South Africans who are left behind, particularly poor ones. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is an absolutely important principle that we apply in the metros that we govern. It's a hugely important for every single South African because they offer a glimpse of a proof concept, hope of our future national government can work. I believe coalitions can help build us a new national identity where all strands can be pulled together. It must make it possible for people to process the fact that the ANC is dead, and nationally, and certainly here in Gauteng, they only have another 18 months to govern. After this, we must bring a new beginning. But if we have this opportunity to hit the reset button, then we should do it properly. We should fix all things that aren't working for us, and one of these things is our electoral system. I worry about the elections in 2019, but beyond that, I think we must reform the fact that people can't depend on their party for their jobs. I believe it's time now to talk about a better way of electing public representatives. Perhaps, as Van Zyl Slabb had argued, the introduction of a hybrid electoral system, part constituency and part proportional system, makes MPs directly accountable to voters. But I want to take this a step further. Should South Africa not be considering a direct election of the president? If we do that, that means the president is always accountable to the people, and we don't have to depend on a party to fix itself, as our Zimbabwean brothers and sisters are learning the hard way. We have to adopt these things if we're going to see a new beginning. So in closing, I want to say, whatever happens at Nasrec next month is immaterial. No new leader will change what the ANC has become. It'll be business as usual. It'll be someone else's turn to eat. And if you look at the recent provincial congresses, the handover of eating privileges is not likely to happen without violence, intimidation, or bribery. So while our attention is focused on Zimbabwe and their palace coup, let us reflect on how easily their military chose sides and became involved in the ZANU-PF faction fight. This is not a natural evolution of a party dominated by corruption. This is a natural evolution for a party dominated by corruption and patronage. And so given that, here at home, the Zuma faction of the ANC already controls not only the Hawks and the NPA, but also state security, it is really far-fetched to suggest that their interests may be defended by force. We are, ladies and gentlemen, experiencing the high securitization of the state and a super presidency without accountability. We can't afford this. So what happens in December could only set the tone of what happens in our country in 2019. It is crucial that our transition to a new government takes place within the protection of law. So if you don't mind, I want to send a message to all those ANC candidates who are standing, because we will have 18 months where the Jacob Zuma project of state capture will still continue, and we can't afford for it to continue. And so to the candidates who should have been here today, I want to say this: if you're serious about sticking your head above the parapet on tough issues, and so that the entire country is not left wondering how you're going to settle their scores, here are a few things that I'd ask you to do as urgent issues right now for each of those candidates. I would call upon all of you to immediately recall Jacob Zuma as President of the Republic of South Africa. I will join you in that motion of no confidence and support the removal of Jacob Zuma. Secondly, I believe you must immediately institute a judicial commission of inquiry into state capture as the public protector prescribes in her remedial action. Thirdly, you must announce steps to immediately remove Sean the Sheep and introduce a new independent national director of public prosecutions. Fourthly and lastly, I would call upon all of you to immediately suspend or stop dreaming about a nuclear deal and suggest that it will be for the good of South Africa. It will destroy our economy. Move away from that. Of course, none of those interventions will save the ANC, but I believe we can form a coalition with those people who are still committed to the values of South Africa. I was really skeptical, Clement, when people said to me I must come here and talk about the elective conference of the ruling party. Because if that's the case, there's really no salvation for our country in the outcome of the December conference. But if we want to talk about the kind of South Africa we'd like to see, and the expectations we have for government tasked with building this South Africa, today could be absolutely important and crucial. And I believe we can. I believe we can pull our country back from the brink and reconstruct it the way we want it to be. And it's only going to happen, and we'll get there, if we can make mature decisions as a country. If our democracy is about to grow, and our people discover their true power and possibility, this all lies in their votes, as it does for the people of Zimbabwe. And I believe that the discussion in South Africa today ought to be a discussion about the future and a vote for the future, and trying to produce a future for South Africa, for all South Africans, rather than in fact trying to correct yesterday. Whilst noting that our yesterday is with us, we have to procure for a future that is coming. I thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Come to this side.
You want me there?
Sure.
Sure.
You promised me that your speech wasn't going to be long.
It wasn't.
Wasn't it?
Clement.
There's a lot to chew on, though.
Sure.
I mean, you spoke about coalition, governance, economy, and we'll get there. But I want us to reflect a little bit on the DA, because you've been gaining ground in recent times. And perhaps I want to start in Parliament. When you switch 408, you see, I suppose, a sea of DA MPs who are mostly white. I want to ask you, what message do you think that sends to the people of South Africa? Are you concerned about the demographics of the DA in Parliament?
Look, as an organization is changing, we must not see this thing out of the context of history. You know, Parliament has a role in society, and it's important. My project is not to replace white people with black people, it's to build a diverse South Africa for all. And therefore, the job that I'm busy with and to achieve that is not to go ahead and set quotas and say, okay, as of next week, we are going to have so many black people, so many white people, and we reflect quotas. What we've got to do is build a very prominent supply side. And so what's happened in the DA? 63% of our public reps are in fact black, if you look at the national picture. 8 of the 9 provincial leaders are in fact black. When you look at even the mayors, the metro mayors that we take, 3 out of the 4 are black South Africans. So what I'm trying to say to you is that as you build the supply side, it will get to a point where in 2019, I believe the picture, as it's a part of the project of my leadership there, is that the caucus at the National Assembly will be far more diverse than at what it is now. You can't change it midstream. You've got to accept that this is a caucus that was constituted in 2014. Now in 2019, we have an opportunity to diversify it and bring on more South Africans as we're seeing. And that's the project of the DA.
No, it's part of your project. And I'll tell you why I'm asking that, because we talk a lot about the perception that the DA is a white party. I'm sure you've had to deal with that, and you've somehow misspelled those perceptions. And many South Africans, or some may argue, that that's a perception that gets communicated to them, entrenching that perception that the DA is a white party. There are several other examples, Mmusi. I mean, you still have a DA MP who will talk about painting his face black so that he could qualify for BEE. You have Helen Zille, I know he's no longer serving in the party's leadership structures, who goes and defends colonialism. Surely those are the things that must embarrass you as the leader of the party, and they make you question whether how serious the DA is about changing the picture, as you say.
No, it's a completely serious project. And whilst, in fact, some of the statements you like, I've taken a stance about them, you must recognize that in South Africa we're engaged in a discussion about race. Because our history divided us on the basis of racial lines. No other party deals with this question because, by and large, we've entered into an era where national liberation movements, as a function, will go out and say, we represent a particular race. They've abandoned a vision of a non-racial movement for all South Africans. And when you have that non-racial movement, underpinned by the constitution that gives the right for people to give expression to their issues, we're going to have these discussions. And we have to sit down and say, you know, when you said that, that's not right. Whether you are black or white, it's not right. Therefore, we must attend to that issue so that we build a reconciled society that continues that project. To suggest that in South Africa today, we are not going to, from time to time, have this conversation would be a misnomer. Because our consensus in '94 was a marriage between races. And from time to time, even in a normal marriage, you are going to say things that offend your partner. But it doesn't mean you must already move for divorce. You must ensure that you clarify that point, build a vision for a non-racial South Africa, and continue to fight for it. And so for me, the project in the DA, if the DA does not succeed in its project of building races together, I am not sure which other political party is doing it. And if we don't succeed, I don't believe South Africa will succeed on this issue.
Then why do you still have these members in the DA who
we work hard.
Take the party back?
It would be tantamount to saying, I mean, if you, firstly, I don't believe that, for example, Helen Zille is racist. I don't believe that. So ultimately, what I've got to do is say, hey, Helen, I want to challenge your view. Is your view correct on this issue? We disagree, and therefore we'll take action against it. And she will come back and say, as she did, to say, I agree, I was wrong. So in South Africa today, it doesn't mean that, and I'm not saying that, and I say this nationally now, it doesn't mean that in 1994 we switched off all racists and said, abaseko manje. You had people in South Africa who held different views. They expressed different views. And the job of leadership was not to say you are going to open up jails and send them there or whatever. It's to say I'm going to challenge that view. I'm going to construct it. And ultimately, if you then say to me that that person is racist or says a racist thing in the DA, then I'll remove them out the DA because that's part of our pledge. But the conversation, when somebody says something, you've got to ultimately keep challenging views in people so that we can build this reconciled South Africa. Because if we don't, I think it's a risk for South Africa.
Okay, and keep them even though they set back the party. Another thing you talk about, I mean, I've asked you this question before. I mean, I go to a lot of marches by the DA, and I mean, it's a flimsy question, but I never really see white people when you are marching on the streets, Mmusi. And I know that one of your colleagues in the DA leadership has written a column to try and explain why that has been the case. What's your view on marches when you organize these projects and marches and you don't see a representation of what you say is the DA at this current moment?
Clement, I think the question is poor. And those who are advancing... There seems to be a permanent notion of advancing that notion, as if when I come to a march, I must do a racial audit. it ceases to be true. What in fact happens, I can tell you, when you organize a march, you pull people from different constituencies and you get them there and they arrive. And every march I've been to that is a DA one, I can sit here and say, look, I felt that all South Africans who are passionate about those issues have turned up at those marches.
Only those that are passionate about the issues.
No.
That is not true, Mmusi.
No, I will tell you the simple
That
facts.
is not true.
I can send you a video up here today.
Let me
South
take you
Africans from
to
all
the
walks
march,
are
the
coming
recent
through.
march that you had when you went to the Gupta family. I'm saying that's the issue that pushed Magashule Ghana to even go and write a column about it. Your own colleague.
I disagree with that column.
Because he made the same observation that you're saying the DA represents all the different races.
Correct.
And I'm saying if you're saying the people that come are the constituencies that are passionate about the issue, white and black people are passionate about the state capture and the centrality of the Gupta family in it.
But Clement, let me reflect on that very same march. What is the threshold of white people that should have been there? Can you tell me? Because when
No,
I
they
was
must be
there,
represented.
I saw white South Africans who came to that march.
How many did you see, Mmusi?
But that's my question. What is the threshold so that it's acceptable to you?
You said your party represents both black and white. If I go to a march about the Gupta family and I see 90%, 95% are black people, that's not a true reflection of what you say is the DA. And that's what you're not answering to.
I will argue this case to say this. Our marches must and will always be diverse. The threshold that you are describing is something that you could sit here today and we can do an analysis. So tomorrow you must
You're
tell
being
me what's the
technical.
right number. But all I can sit here and say to you today is that when I put together a march, I call upon all South Africans to come through. The march we had at the Constitution Square, you were there.
Yes.
You
And I
know
saw
for a
one white
fact-
person, I even tweeted about it.
No, you know for a fact that there were many white South Africans who were there. The one we even had before the motion of no confidence. I will send you the video. You can Google it all online. I'm not here to defend the fact that marches must represent a particular race. I'm simply here to indicate to you the fact that you can't sit here today and run some form of analysis of what the races are represented. Because tomorrow I've got to say, well, there's so many colored people to this march, so many Indian people to this march,
If
so
you're
many
serious
this.
about
And what I
transformation, Mmusi,
want
I think
is I've got to bring all South
If you're
Africans
serious about
together to the
transformation,
march.
that should concern you. If you're serious about
I
transformation
am
of
more
the
than
DA.
serious.
Let's move over to the principles and the values of the organization. And I want us to move to the elective conference because that's what the theme is about. But I want us to reflect quickly on the DA. The values and principle of the organization. I mean, the party is growing. As I said, it's gaining ground. And I've been hearing some debates from some DA members about the black radical nationalists that are trying to dominate the organization. Are you ready for the party to evolve, and as it evolves, for its principles and values to change? And I'll tell you why I'm asking, because recently, Helen Ziller, in fact earlier this year, cautioned against the DA sifting through its principles and values in quest for power by cozying up with parties that don't share its liberal sensibilities. And you'll agree with me, you are cozying up with the EFF, and you'll agree with me that they don't necessarily share your liberal sensibilities. So talk to me about those values and principles.
I think we must clarify what you call liberal values. See, I stand up here and I still believe there should always be constitutionalism, the rule of law, a transparent media, electoral processes, an economy that is growing, a capable state. And ultimately a pursuit of non-racialism. Any person who wants to join the DA must subscribe to those values. And the difficulty is that as you grow, you're going to attract people from all walks of life. Some who come into the organization unclear about what values are and all of that, and your job is to educate, help people see your way so that you can continue to grow. But what you can't do is say, no, I'm going to stop growing. You have to educate South Africans and bring on those values because they're important to fight for. That's why when I went to Zambia, I wasn't fighting for just HH. I was fighting for those values, that there must be transparent, a free media, for your right to say whatever you feel like saying. Now, the next point that you make is that as we do that, in coalitions, I am not here to convert the EFF's ideology. Neither am I here to convert anyone's ideology. What I've got to do is raft out a program that says, what are we doing to deliver for people? on the basis of constitutionalism, the rule of law, and intolerance for corruption. And those things at local government work because you can say to people, here's what we stand for and we're fighting for. And I think across the political party spectrum, there are things we're not going to change of each other. But where we agree, we must work together because it is important for the project of coalition to work for South Africa and all South Africans.
It gets trickier though, Mmusi, when you have to deal with at national government and you have to go into a coalition with the EFF because they've got those 7
pillars,
non-negotiable, we have to say, cardinal pillars.
Yes.
How do you reconcile that? I mean, I understand with the ANC you share agreements on the NDP, market-based economy, but you need the EFF if there's not going to be a breakaway at the elective conference.
Yeah, sure. But look, one of the things, and I've been traveling even internationally to study this thing, when you're managing coalitions as to how you do it. The anomaly we've got in South Africa is that we give ourselves a short space of time to say, elections were on this day, you have to form a government on that day. And so you almost have 10 days or 14 days to try and do that. You can't negotiate through things. I think rather than trying to fuse values and say, okay, you want nationalization, we'll negotiate it here. I think we must agree on what are the broad principles around constitutionalism so that we can draft out and work meticulously to what government program we must do. And if we can find agreement on those things and execute against that, we can be able to deliver for the prosperity of South Africans and break down this divide between the elite and the poor. What I will not be in coalition with is corruption, racism. I will not do that because it will regress this country in a way that we don't want to go. We must coalesce again around, let's do what's best for the people of South Africa.
Okay, Mmusi, you haven't answered my question, but I'm running out of
time.
time.
No, it's happening.
Do I have time to take 2 questions? No? Yes? 2 questions. Let's just take 2 questions. I wanted to ask about your hopes for the elective conference. Who do you hope wins, loses? Because you've previously said you're willing to work with the good men and women of the ANC. All right. Can we have the mic through to Mr. O'Sullivan?
Thank you, Paul O'Sullivan. We heard yesterday in Parliament Zola Sotsi admitting that President Zuma, his mistress, Dudu Mayeni Zuma, and their son, Talenti, together with a lawyer called Nick Linnell, commenced the process of capturing Eskom. Are the committee in Parliament going to subpoena Dudu Mayeni to explain her absolutely outrageous conduct?
Yeah. All right. Can we have the mic over the guy behind, in the red T-shirt?
Thank you. Pastor Mmusi, the DA is a white party and it will remain a white party because the majority of the voters of the DA, despite what you have presented here,
your question,
white people. Sir. Okay, I'll come to my question. You spoke about the land policy. You said that you spoke about title deeds and share schemes and all of that. But I believe your approach to the land question is fundamentally flawed. Why? Because it does not speak to the historical dispossession of black people. What do I mean? You must first acknowledge the fact that black people were dispossessed their land. That the entire country, as we know it, was taken forcefully from our people. Now, if you are going to approach or seek to redress the issue by speaking about giving people title deeds, and by title deeds you are speaking to these RDP houses, that is not dealing with the land question. So for as long as you don't deal with that, you will remain a white party.
Thank you. Just the last one over there at the corner. Just the last one, quickly.
Thank you very much. Sebenzile Nkambule here. I enjoyed your answer, Mmusi, about improving supply so that you can actually change the face of what's happening in Parliament. It's a brilliant answer, straight from the book of Saru's Philosophy on Transformation. The supply is there. Why aren't people actually making it within? But my question really is around what your gender agenda is. You mentioned two evils that South Africa is dealing with. You said it's racial oppression as well as colonization. I was hoping that you would also include patriarchy, because when you talk about unemployment, when you talk about the worst affected, and Stats SA has the numbers to back this up, women are the worst affected. They're most adversely affected, and black women in particular.
Sure.
Yesterday on an interview at a rival station, 702, Eusebius asked you about this gender question. And you immediately went on to talk about, no, women must compete as though the playing field is equal. How is it that you're able to appreciate this factor when it's about race, right? You fully understand that black people don't have, the playing field is not the same. And that's why it was even important for the DA that for Helen Zeller's successor to be a black person. Admit it, you like it or not, that is a fact, was important. So how is it that you appreciate the need for representation when it comes to race, but there's all sorts of excuses when it comes to gender representation?
Thank you. Mr. Maimane?
I'll be quick. Paul, to your question, there's a list of people who have been subpoenaed to come there, and Dudumieni is certainly not going to be exempt from the process. I'm sure she'll be there, and there are a few other brothers who need to also be there as well. I won't mention them by name, but they should be. The question about land, firstly, your statistics are absolutely inaccurate. I mean, to come here and argue the fact that the people who vote for the DA are white is tantamount to saying that for the DA to achieve the percentage, the electoral percentage it achieved in Tshwane, it would only be on the back of white South Africans. It's a fallacy. It's just propaganda designed to create a particular impression so that you can split the nation on the basis of race and mobilize people on that ground. But to your question about land, certainly you can't depart from Section 25 of the Constitution, because I don't think the Constitution is the problem here. The Constitution gives us the appropriate tools, whether it's about land reform, land restitution, and key to those policies. So when we talk about, for us, private property and individual rights still remains important. Why do we want to go in the same Land Act sin, the original sin of apartheid, want to say when we arrive in the Eastern Cape, it must be communal land and no one person can hold it. Whilst in fact I'm calling for the individuals, Obomamu Kumalo, Abomamu Smangma, so that in Nebo never own, they must own it themselves, not in a communal trust, so that they individually can in fact make the decisions about their prospects. That's the fight. That's why the rollout of title deed. In fact, the Zulu king went ahead and said that we must roll out more title deeds even in the Ngonyama Trust. On the economic questions around farms, what I don't want is this notion where in fact people say, let's capture a farm and give it to a politically connected person in the ANC. I'm saying when we create equity schemes, let the people who work in the land own the land, because they are the ones who know what to do with it. But this populist rhetoric will end us up in the same space as Venezuela when we suspend the constitution and simply say without a land audit, let's just take it and give it without the proper process of constitutionalism. Look, I take your absolute point about the feminization of poverty and ultimately the fact that women in this country still remain left behind. When I argued the case to say that we must create opportunities and ensure, you can ask anybody, there is in any list process of the DA a very strong sense upon which gender as a consideration is at the forefront. It's not just race. So when I talk about, and in fact I'm going to the DA's Congress next year in April, one of the values we want to include there is a diversity, not just only of race, but of gender, of age, etc. When we talk about what economic opportunities do we offer women, I can give you a whole policy suite, but let me give you just some practical things that we've done. For example, in the city of Cape Town, there is a direct approach to say where businesses are worked and managed by women, they should be given preference and an opportunity to be able to do so. When I answered the question about cradle to career, more must be done about ensuring that the dignity of girls is preserved all the way through from cradle to opportunity, to career. So we can't allow ourselves to be in a space where, in fact, our young girls drop out of school Some of it for pathetic reasons, like the fact that they don't have sanitary towels. I think it's useless. Our government must be at the forefront of providing health products for young women. That shouldn't be a debate. It's in the Constitution. But we must ensure that we create all of those opportunities to come through. My debate at the rival radio station was the suggestion that I must go to congresses and say to people, you will vote for this person because they're a woman. Now, I think that not only insults the woman, it insults the very delegates who are there to vote. It is tough in a democratic process. So even without quotas in the DA, we've correctly had a woman leader. And even without quotas, in provinces like the Free State, we're finding women leaders who are coming through. Do I want more? Of course I can. But what I've got to do is not to set a quota for the outcome, to sit down and say, in this Congress, of the 10 leaders you picked, 3 will be women. We don't even have a choice about that. That undermines democracy. Yeah. What I want to do is let's allow the best females, let's allow the best leaders to get through, because leadership is not a function of gender, it's a function of leadership. And if we can provide those opportunities for women, we're better off.
All right.
I've gone for a while about this.
One last quick question, Mmusi. You've previously spoken about how Helen Zille has done an incredible job in moving the DA to make it the official opposition party, and that your task was now to make it a party in government. The reality is the DA is still, below 35% now in the national vote, so you are headed for a coalition, if, of course, that's what, and you've spoken about now. I wanted to ask you about the elective conference. Who do you hope wins? Because you keep on talking about the good men of the ANC, and earlier this year, when you spoke about the future of the DA being in coalition, you also said you are willing to go into coalition with the breakaway party from the ANC. Who does that breakaway party involve?
Well,
is Ramaphosa one of the people?
I'm not here to pick a candidate for the ANC, otherwise it would contradict the fact that I believe that the ANC is dead. What I want to do is that for those South Africans who still today, and there are some of them in parliament, some of them are speaking later on today, but I'm not going to get into names, who stood up and said, we still stand for constitutionalism, we still stand for non-racialism, we still stand for a market-based economy, we still stand for a capable state, and we have an intolerance for corruption. If those South Africans are willing to work with me to build the South Africa we want to build, those are the people I'll go into a coalition with, and they span across multiple parties, and some of them are still in the ANC. I think this gives them an opportunity to be freed up from the shackles of our history, to say, let us come in and form a party and form a movement that will in fact coalesce around those values so that we can take South Africa in the right direction.
Would you work with Ramaphosa?
I think it doesn't matter who wins. Let those people who share those values come on board so we can work together and build the South Africa we want. Because Ramaphosa has defended Zuma at times, so I'm not here to pick him or pick NDZ. It's irrelevant for me.
Mmusi Maimane, thank you so much.